father. And if you look closely to his right, you'll see a mule and a wagon. He had humble beginnings, and he started with the mule and the wagon. And before the age of 39, he had progressed to 3 tractor trailer trucks, a store on Highway 80, and he was employing about 40 people. In 2009, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries published a book entitled Bloody Lowndes. And that is because Lowndes County was known to be a terrible county where whites killed whites and nothing was done about it. And of course, whites killed the blacks. So he found that the county had already had that name. And he did his dissertation on that, and he included my father in his dissertation. This is the story that was printed in the Montgomery Advertiser. I was not aware of this story until I was about 35 years of age. Not Tina, but Ebony told you in her introduction that my father was killed when I was 5 years of age. So there are specific things that I want you to notice about this particular article. Number one, it says Negro killed Lowndes man free on bond. A white man was arrested for the killing of my father. Then I want you to look at the very last paragraph there where it says a funeral home operator said that the Negro had been shot half a dozen times with a pistol and once in the back with a shotgun. And I just told you that a white man was arrested for the murder. So therefore, you're aware that one person cannot use a shotgun and a pistol. Then if you go to the bottom on the first column, it says Bowling had an excellent reputation in the community. He had a wife and 7 children, and he had an estate of $5,000. So $5,000 was a lot of money. Take my jacket off. $5,000 was a lot of money back then. However, my uncle said my father had $40,000 in the bank. Now, also in the same article, it may be difficult to see. It says that the cause for the slaying, according to the deputy sheriff, was my father insulted the killer's wife on the telephone earlier that day. So he gave a motive for the killing. It also mentions that the grand jury is going to meet in March. And at the top of the next column up there where it says Negro is killed, it says some residents spoke of the presence of a second white man. So that means it had what? Witnesses. So that article was on the front page of the Montgomery Advertiser. And as I mentioned, I had no idea about that publication until I was about 35 years of age. I was 6 when this picture was taken. Actually, it was the next year after the murder. This article was sent to Thurgood Marshall. It was a letter. And in this letter, he enclosed that newspaper clipping that I just showed you. And he goes on to say in this letter that he was compelled to send this article and that the mob has begun to do something different. It gets 1 or 2 people to commit the crime. A new type of lynching is developing. And he says, whenever things come our way, we don't have any money. And this was the secretary of, not the secretary of the NAACP, but one of the members of the Montgomery NAACP. And this came to me from the National Library of Congress. And at the top, you see scripted there, possible lynching. So now I'm beginning to wonder, what is a lynching? And then some friends of mine found this article from the Chicago Defender. And it says, believe Dixie gang murdered young father. And it goes on to say that it is believed that enraged, jealous whites shoot down successful businessman, and they are the lynchers of Elmore Bowling. So once again, the word lynching appears. So the only lynchings that I was aware of was without sanctuary, and that's a whole lot of pictures with lynch victims. And I began doing research and found Ida B. Wells. And what happened with Ida B. Wells, when she sent a letter to President McKinley and she went to see him, it was because 3 of her friends had actually shot a man who was trying to stop them from operating their business. They had a store like my father did. But the whites got them out of the jail and carried them and shot them horribly. So that was when I first realized that lynchings are the title, the definition has nothing to do with the type of crime. It is dependent on the number of people who commit the crime and that there's no due process. This is another article that was in the Negro News, and down at the bottom where you see the star, once again, it just talks about the murder of my father, and it has his age listed as 30, but actually he was 39, so that was a typo. Now, Rosa Parks was the secretary of the NAACP, and in her autobiography, she talked about my father's murder. And if you look at the bottom left there, she says that the murder of Elmore Bowling was similar to another man's murder, and that is that a white man caught my father with a Black woman, and that the white man was dating the Black woman, and he killed him because of that. But what's more significant up there is that she said that the white man was arrested and he pleaded self-defense. So hold on to that he pleaded self-defense. Well, this is where I went to the courthouse and actually got the docket. And if you come all the way down to the second one from the bottom, you see the word murder, you see the name Clark Lucky. Directly underneath there, it says no bill. So that means that Rosa Parks' book was inaccurate. She says that he pleaded self-defense. He was not indicted, so there was no plea. And also, this is where the foreman signed saying that he called these witnesses to testify. My uncle was present, and he said when my father's case came up, they just discussed the case among themselves, and they called no witnesses. This is she's deceased now, but her husband was the cousin of the killer. And another rumor was that the killer killed my father about a Black woman. And so she said, my cousin did not like Black women. So I had different people to help me find out the actual reason for the murder. And this man is Robert Bob Dixon. Anyone back in the day who knew anything about Lowndes County has heard of the name Robert Bob Dixon. If you lived on his property, you could not move. The debt, DEBT, peonage, Peonage system was in place in Alabama. It was in the Constitution. And you could not move off a man's property as long as you owed that person. So of course, each year, you never got out of debt. And Bob Dixon really, really enforced that. If you tried to move, he would kill you. And this shows another article that was in the paper about my father. This is when his truck collided with a white woman, and the white woman was killed and he was arrested but released because the lady actually ran into him. Now I want to go back to Bob Dixon for a moment. Bob Dixon actually had my father arrested when his trucks became successful because he thought he might come on his property and take some of the people off. So he told him not to come on his property. So after he got out of jail, he could not get anyone to testify against him. Remember in the newspaper article, it said my father had an excellent reputation. He could not get anyone to testify against my father. So he decided, since he could not make the charge stick, he asked my father and mother to come see him. So when my father and mother went over there, he told him, I want you to come work for me. My father never used the pronoun I. He said, me don't work for nobody. He said, well, you know, Elmore, I own so much property, you can drive all day in Lowndes County and never get off my property. Come work for me, I'll make it worth your while. And once again, my father told him, me don't work for nobody. So Bob Dixon was unaccustomed to anybody telling him what they weren't gonna do. And he's also unaccustomed to a Black man looking him in his eye. But he respected that. And he finally said, well, if you won't come work for me, will you haul for me? And my father agreed. So this began part of the allyship that I was telling you about that I wanted you to get from the book. First of all, after my father had the mule and wagon, he bought a T-model car, and he used that to transport. After he was so successful with the T-model car, he transformed it into a truck. And after that, he actually bought 3 trucks. But when he got ready to buy his first truck, he found out that he was not supposed to have that kind of money. And the white man from whom he was about to buy the truck was about to have him arrested, except that he had bought some of the goods from him that he was transporting. So he knew he had earned the money. One of the big things that my father transported from Lowndes County to Montgomery back then was kindling. So you know how important kindling was, because there were no gas stoves, and there was no electricity. So everybody needed what? Kindling. So this man had bought a lot of kindling from him. And so my father had prospered from all of the kinds of things that he transported. So finally he sold him a truck. But after that, a white man named Delvin Holly went with my father every time he got ready to buy a truck, and he pretended he was buying the truck until time to pay for it. And then he would tell the owner, this man is going to pay for it, it's going to be in his name. So my father actually could not buy a truck without the assistance of a white man. So now we're going back to Bob Dixon. So now he began hauling for Bob Dixon, and Bob Dixon's reputation went all the way to Washington, D.C. Everybody in the South and the North knew Bob Dixon and his reputation. The letter that I showed you that was written to Thurgood Marshall, I told you I got it from the Library of Congress. It never reached Thurgood Marshall. That was the kind of influence that Bob Dixon had. Otto Moore was the sheriff, and anyone who knew anything about Lowndes County knew that he killed just to kill. And he would pick up boys doing nothing, put them in the trunk of his car, drive them around, and then at the end of the day, they would be dead. But it didn't matter. This is another one of my witnesses. I interviewed 51 people, by the way, and this man's name was Joe Cook. And he was telling me that he was walking along the highway one day, and he didn't get in the woods quickly enough when he heard a car. So Otto Moore, the sheriff, shot him in the foot. So the next day, his boss went to Otto Moore and said, you shot my worker in the foot. The sheriff told him, I could have shot him in the head. It didn't make any difference. Now, this man was 104 when I finally finished interviewing him. He said his alphabet backwards, and he was just amazing. Whatever he told me a lot about a whole lot of the residents in Lowndes County, And I did many, many interviews with him. And he was amazing. And my friend did not like the word nonagenarian. I said, well, then you don't put nonagenarian in the book. I said, just put men over 90. So she finally agreed to use nonagenarian. So this was a nonagenarian. This is a nonagenarian. And he was responsible for telling me that the school I was attending when my father was lynched was still in existence. He said, every time I leave home and go down to Lowndes County, I walk through that school. So the school that Tina told you about is called the Lounsboro School. It was not named after a plantation owner because it was named after the town of Lounsboro. So that school was donated to my foundation, and we are preserving it and restoring it, as Tina said. This man here was in a nursing home, and he was a double amputee, was sitting out in the hallway when I got to the hospital, and he was staring at me. And so I wondered, and I got closer and closer to him. I said, do you know me? He said, you look like a cane. I said, my mother was a cane. He said, then you must be Elmore Bowling's daughter. My father had moved him from Birmingham to Lowndes County to work for his grandfather as a youth. And he knew all kinds of information about my father and the history and all of that. So it was just wonderful how the Lord put people in my path who could help me with my story, trying to find out what happened to my father. These are my brothers and my uncle and my grandfather. My grandfather did not take anything off anybody. The one sitting down there at the bottom with the smile on his face. And when you read my book, you'll find out that because of my grandfather, 2 years after my father was lynched, we had to leave Lowndes County. But you have to read that in my book. Now, I mentioned to you that my father was a philanthropist. And when I was growing up, we moved to Montgomery when I was 7. All I had to do was say my name was Josephine Bowling. Accolades would follow. Everybody's, are you Elmore Bowling's daughter? Well, when I interviewed this couple and they told me all of the things that my father had done, King Stewart finally said, the only way Elmore Bowling wouldn't help you is that you didn't ask. He created jobs for people. He paid you more than the job was worth. He helped anyone who asked for help. So after I interviewed him, this was in 2006, 2007, I quit writing and decided that this man had to have a historic marker. So in 2007, my family and I erected this historic marker. It's on mile marker 114 in Lowndes County. And I always get a thrill when I tell people I can make anyone in the audience know where Lowndes County is. And they say, what? I said, I can make anyone of you know where Lowndes County is. Simply because, how many of you have heard of the march from Selma to Montgomery? 22 of those historic miles are in Lowndes County. You heard of Viola Louiso, the white woman who left her 5 children and went to help with the march? She was killed in Lowndes County. Jonathan Daniels, the white priest who came at the beckon of Martin Luther King, he was killed in Lowndes County. So that goes back to show you what the book was about, Bloody Lowndes, because Lowndes County has always been bloody. Now, getting back to Bob Dixon, I told you all about how he had begun to work with my father. My father could tell anyone that the trucks belonged to him, so his trucks could roll whenever he wanted them to roll. And so I'm skipping now to 1947, the year my father was killed. Bob Dixon called my father to him November around Thanksgiving and told him he needed to leave Lowndes County and that he would sell all of his merchandise and send his family to him, but he needed to leave Lowndes County. My father refused. Bob Dixon made 3 attempts before he finally went to a mixed couple. My aunt actually lived with a white man as concubine. He went to them and tried to convince them to get my father to leave. My father would not leave, so my father was killed in less than a week. And this copy here came to me with that letter that came from the Library of Congress. And this is how I know that the article that was sent to Thurgood Marshall never reached. They have the same date stamp on them, and they both came from the Library of Congress at the same time. So that is the end of my presentation, and I will be glad to answer questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to Philip. And I may have advanced it too far, Philip. No, that's fine.
Obviously, I drew the short straw in going after Miss Bowling, but I could, like I'm sure you all listen to her all day in telling her story about her father and the history of Lowndes County. What an absolute honor to even be on the stage with Miss Bowling, as it is to be with the rest of the panelists and moderator. I am really excited to be here and really honored to even be asked to be a part of this conference. I am Philip Howard, and I like to say before I am a son of the Black Belt. I was born in Selma, grew up in Marion, well, went home as a child in Marion, but grew up in Greene County. So I really proud to say that I'm a son of the Black Belt. And it really means a lot to me, and it means a lot to my family. If you notice during my bio, I don't have a long bio because I have not been in this space that long. April of this year, I was working at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and a few months before that, I really just fell in love with the history of Alabama and the history of the Black Belt region. So I got one day, I beat my wife home and I cleaned up really good, had the kids ready for bed. I just did everything, you know, I cooked, whatever I thought she would have wanted me to do, I did. And I got up the nerves to ask her, I said, well, you know I work here, but I would really love to go and work in the space of historic preservation. And she went and checked the wine bottles to make sure I was good, and there was still some there. But I convinced her that it would pay off in the long run, and she allowed me to do it. So I've only been in this space for a short while. Oh, what did I do? I did what they told me not to do. Because you do not need to see me twice. Thank you. I apologize for that. But that threw me off. Um, but no, but I fell in love with the work, and it has been, I left the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I like to say I have not worked a day since. Um, Being in this space and being able to be around people like Ms. Bowling, being able to be around this history and these places, it's really just a feeling you can't describe. I work for an organization called the Conservation Fund. And I am the program manager for a program that they started called Civil Rights, People, and Places. And what we are trying to do with that program is really trying to fill in the gaps. What you're going to see in some of my slides, this history has, gone through a lot. It's almost like we've forgotten how important it is. So I today will try to be a hype man to let you know how important the history of the Black Belt is, and why we are, the things like the Black Belt National Heritage Act are so important. But a little bit about the Conservation Fund. we have protected over 9 million acres of timberland, conservation projects around the country. Here in Alabama, we have done things like the last battle of the Civil War was fought in Alabama at the Battle of Fort Blakely down in Baldwin County. We helped protect that site down in Baldwin County. In Anniston, the Freedom Rider story. We are helping the Freedom Rider Park Board in Anniston tell the story. We purchased some buildings in Anniston to help them better tell the story of the Freedom Rides in Anniston, Alabama. So please look up the Conservation Fund. They have been a great organization and a great partner in the work that I am a part of. Dr. Jeffries, who Ms. Bowling mentioned, I heard him say, when you talk about race and you talk about history and civil rights and African Americans, oftentimes you have to start at slavery. And I won't do that today, but Ms. Bowling, in her example of her father and the murder of Emmett Till, if you want to understand the life of African Americans before 1955 and before the modern civil rights movement, that's what it was. It was murder, it was lynching, it was unfairness, it was immoral, it was hate, it was people who looked like me. Wow, we had a really, really tough time in this country. We were treated, my father was a World War II veteran in uniform, had to walk, get off the sidewalk when a little boy, white boy walked by, even in uniform, because that's just the climate and how it was then. And so when we're thinking about these events in the Black Belt around civil rights, you have to think about the period that they were in. Emmett Till, I did not do that this time. I did not do that. But I will keep going. I did not do it that time, I promise. I didn't push it. But the murder of Emmett Till, was so horrendous and horrific. And it really tells the story of African Americans here. And so you see the signs and the everyday indignities that African Americans had to face during that period. So when you think about the events that happened in the Black Belt, and like Ebony said, there were a lot of events around the country. There were a lot of people around the country who were a part of this movement. It didn't start in 1955, but it was really, it took off in 1955. And history says that the murder of Emmett Till had a lot to do with that. But also another individual who had a lot to do with that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have to admit, I believe this is one of the greatest humans to ever walk the earth. His contribution, his effort, his love for mankind, I just think it's unmatched. And if it is even possible, I don't even think we honor him enough. So Dr. King, to me, is a big reason why we are where we are today. And I know in this space, certainly locally, I hear all the time that, Dr. King was just one of many. And he was. There were a lot of people who contributed to the civil rights movement, locally, everywhere. But there's only one Dr. King. And the story of Dr. King, I like to say, Atlanta celebrates the life of Dr. King. Memphis commemorates his death. Alabama is where his work was. Alabama is where his legacy was. And a lot of it was here in this Black Belt region. And if you can see the church right there, Mount Zion AME on Hope Street, not even that far from here, is where Dr. King took his first leadership position. 70 miles west of here is where he got married in a small town called Marion, Alabama. A little ways up the road is where 2 of his first children were born. So Dr. King, while he was not from Alabama, he is Alabama. And I certainly look at him that way. And when we talk about these spaces, this is Mount Zion today. So this space is hallowed ground. So when we're talking about what the National Heritage Act, Black Belt National Heritage Act, it could help make sure that when you come and visit Montgomery, you don't have to just ride by a place like this with this history, what it means to not only this city, but to the story of civil rights. You will be able to go and experience and touch these spaces. Holt Street Baptist Church is where, of course, the first mass meeting of the civil rights movement was held on December 5th, 1955, after the arrest of Rosa Parks, not far from here. And I'm saying not far from here, you're in the Black Belt now, so I'm really trying to let you know the events that these communities in this area are a part of. The people of the Black Belt changed the world. Farmers, janitors, teachers, normal everyday people, even in the face of events that happened to Ms. Bowling and her family, even in the face of a number of lynchings, they still stood up. And so not only is the region important for its biodiversity and soul, the people of the Black Belt are something to discuss and talk about as well. Holt Street Baptist Church does not look like that right now. It is in construction, and we're hoping at some point these spaces will be somewhere where we could go and have something like this on the inside of these spaces. Of course, Dr. King again, and I can't stress enough the people of the Black Belt. I look at Dr. King as a general. This was his army. And there were a nonviolent army of people in this region that stood up and fought for equal rights and justice and walked. And so when we go to the Mount Rushmore of civil rights events, there's the Montgomery bus boycott, there's the Freedom Rides, there's the Birmingham Campaign Project C, and then there's the Selma to Montgomery March. Those 4 events, 3 of them all have a direct link to the Black Belt region, and certainly the Birmingham Campaign does as well. But the Freedom Rides, I've had the honor of meeting the 3rd, Catherine Burks Brooks, who absolutely has the best mugshot photo you will ever see. She is a beautiful woman, even to this day, and has an amazing story. So the Freedom Rides, the story in Anniston, Birmingham, and Montgomery in Alabama. The Freedom Ride Museum here in in Montgomery, Dorothy Walker does an amazing job. There is not much of a space in Birmingham where you can go and have and visit and learn more about the Freedom Ride story. In Anniston, like I mentioned before, we're working to help them develop that story. And of course, the bus, I have had the pleasure of meeting. Right now, there were 13 original Freedom Riders. There are only 2 that are still with us. Charles Person, who was assaulted on the bus in Birmingham, and Hank Thomas, who was on this bus right here. And hearing Mr. Thomas tell the story of, I thought it would be best for me to inhale smoke than to get off the bus into the hand of the white mob. That's his story. And another thing about Mr. Thomas and Mr. Person, both of these men, who were one of the 13 original Freedom Riders, Mr. Person was, I think, 18 at the time, and Mr. Thomas was a young man as well. Both of them went on to join the military. Mr. Thomas is a Purple Heart recipient, and Mr. Person served 20 years in the Marine Corps. So you have 2 men who had to fight their country, but loved it enough to go fight for their country. And so these are the type of people that you meet in this space. And I can tell you, you will never be the same again after talking to men like that. They are just phenomenal people. And of course, the Birmingham Campaign, 1963, the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the impact that had not only on the Birmingham community, but the world, for 4 little girls to be killed in that manner. And of course, Dr. King did their eulogy, but this space, I hope that we can continue to tell these stories. And these stories, while they can be horrendous, and they are, I try to look for the beauty in the story. And the beauty in the story is the people who would not let those memories die, who continue to fight for what was right. And so we're grateful for that, and certainly grateful for Dr. King. As we move to the Selma to Montgomery March story, a lot of people think it begins on Bloody Sunday, but the truth of it, it did not. The catalyst for the march was the death of this man, Jimmy Lee Jackson, in Marion, Alabama. Mr. Jackson, February 18th, 1965, marchers came out of this church in Marion, Zion United Methodist Church. Just a personal point of privilege. My father, who passed in 2019, his first church as a pastor was Zion United Methodist Church, and he was very proud of that. But February 18th, 1965, marchers came out of this door to march to the jail that was, you see the building to the left. The jail was on the other side of that building. They came out of there. Police turned the lights off in the town square and began to beat the marchers. Mr. Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was an Army veteran, another man who loved a country that did not love him, in protecting his grandfather, was shot by a state trooper and killed, and he died 7-8 days later. And so after his death, marchers began, what would they do? How would they honor this man? They were angry, they were upset, and so they wanted to carry his body they wanted to carry his body from Marion to the steps of the state capitol and show George Wallace what his state troopers had did. They did not do that, but they did do the Selma to Montgomery March. And it was a big part of his legacy, is a big part of that. And just a little bit that I did not know, I think there were about 500 marchers on the bridge on Bloody Sunday. 300 were from Marion, this small community. 300 people were from Marion. You know, so these stories, the Civil Rights People and Places program that I'm a part of, we're trying to uncover these stories and bring more awareness to them and highlight them and help protect places like Zion in Marion. And of course, the 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery, where they walked every inch of it. And there were stories of, and at campsite 2, there was a story of a young girl whose shoes were worn when she got to campsite 2, and she, instead of shoes, she finished the walk in Cracker Jack boxes. You know, that's the level of dedication and the stories you get once you dive a little bit deeper. And of course, we know about Bloody Sunday and the events of that. Brown Chapel, these spaces in the Black Belt is what I am trying to really drill home. They're here and they need support. And we're losing them because of that lack of support. If you go to Brown Chapel right now, there's a huge restoration project going right now. They still need more money to finish it because it was so, when they got in, they found other issues. So this effort of these spaces that mean the world, these events are not local. These are global events. They shifted America from where it was when we had the death of Emmett Till, when you can just lynch a 14-year-old boy, pull him out of his bed in the middle of the night and torture him and kill him. These people fought against that. And I for one, am moved by it. and will not stop until we figure out a way um, to make sure that they're protected. One of the things that I'm most proud of and really excited about is my relationship with the campsite families. Um, no, the marchers didn't march over the bridge and automatically appear in Montgomery. They had to actually walk the 54 miles, and they had to have a place to stay on that journey. This is campsite 1, the David Hall farm. And this is the home that was there in 1965. And that's a picture of Mr. Hall, and that's his family. And that's the sign if you go now to see this home, that's what you will see. And we're trying to help this family protect that home and tell the story of their loved one who, if it were not for the campsite families, the march would have never had happened because they would not have had a place to stay. They were not able to stay on the side of the road. They had to have a place to stay. This man who was working for the city of Selma at the time, there are different stories about how it came to be for them to be at for him to accept them and allow the marchers to come. But he did. And we're trying to protect his family home and make sure that it's able to be around for years to come. As you can see, it's in a tough conditions, but we're hopeful. This is the marchers leaving. That bench that is right there in the picture is still in the home. I've sat on it. And I have to tell you, I like bragging. I've met Mr. Person. I consider him a friend. He considers me a friend. I've met Mr. Thomas. I just had a meeting with Attorney Fred Gray a couple of weeks ago. So all of these people are just amazing people that you cannot even believe you're in the same room with. And visiting this home and talking to this family, it changes you. Campsite 2, Rosie Steele, and I would do a quick survey of how many people have heard of the name Rosie Steele. Rosie Steele was born in 1889. She was a child of formerly enslaved people. She was able to become a business owner. She owned property in, I think, like 3 different counties. She owned a store. She was widowed in 1924, went on to raise 5 kids and do all of this in her life. And in 1965, it was told that Stokely Carmichael and Bob Mance went to her home and asked if the marchers could stay on her property. And without hesitating, she said yes. And I think at that time, she may have been 79 years old, without fear, no fear, and said yes for the marchers staying on her home. So we're working with the families of Campsite 2 to tell her, after the march, her home and store burned down. They don't know. Some family members think it was in retaliation. Some think it was an accident. We may never know. But what we do know is that after the march, her home and store burned down. After the march, David Hall could not get loans, he had a farm, working farm, could not get loans, could not get credit. Every bank turned them down. So there were repercussions for these actions, but they still did it. This is Campsite 3, and this is the home of Robert and Mary Gardner. This is the last stop before the marchers got into the city of Montgomery. The Gardner family, we're working with them to help restore and preserve this home. As you can imagine, there are challenges here. Robert Gardner was one of 15 children. So you can imagine there's an heirs property challenge there. But the good thing about it, and what we've committed to the families, we're going to be here. Whatever you need us to do, we're going to do. And we've tried to do that and support them. Last year was the first year that these families had ever even met. And they share this story. And they share this. They're the only campsite families they have in anywhere. And they had never met before last year. And we got together and we did a film, and it was mentioned, 54 Miles to Home was the first film They never even talked publicly about it. Their families did this in 1965 and they went to work the next day. No acknowledgement, didn't want it. It was dangerous for them to talk about it. The Gardner family had to have FBI protection for a year afterwards, but it shows the type of people that lived in this region, in the Black Belt region. So when we talk about the Black Belt region, we're talking about places, we're talking about the soil, we're talking about the biodiversity, the different species of birds and fish, but we're also talking about people. And those people, these families changed the world. And to be around them, I mean, it's unbelievable. So some of the acknowledgements that we've had, we partnered with the National Trust and we were on the 11 most endangered historic places. This is about the film that we did. And we've gotten a lot of partners to come to the table to be a part of this effort. I was just mentioning that every time I come to Montgomery, it seems like I get good news. The last time I was here, I got news that we were funded to do another film. I got news today that we were approved for a grant from Wells Fargo, and to really support these spaces and these people and the stewards of this history. You're gonna find in this space that a lot of people who are doing the work are older, like in their 70s, which is great, but you're asking people in their 70s to learn what a grant portal is. They need our support. We have to support them. They've done enough, people. They've done enough. We have to figure out a way to support them and make sure these stories are not lost. And I'm all in. This work has moved me, and it's just an awesome opportunity. And I can't. My wife gets tired of me talking about it, and my kids too. They're 6. They don't even know what I'm talking about, and they have to sit there and listen as well. But there have been a lot of great partners that have come to the table, and we're excited about the momentum. We're excited about the act is going to be passed. I'm going to go ahead and claim it. And we understand that there's help on the way. And so you saw the spaces now. I don't know when Montgomery's going to be in the queue for the next conference. The next time you all come here, they won't look like that. We're going to make sure that they don't. We're not going to lose these stories. We're not going to lose these people. They deserve to see these spaces respected and honored. They deserve that. And it's our responsibility to make sure it happens. So I appreciate you all. Thank you.
You hear me? All right, cool. Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Jenkins. First of all, I'm just incredibly humbled to be on the stage with you all. I was before, but after seeing all your presentations and just digging deeper into the work that y'all do, like it's incredibly humbling to be up here with y'all today. I work for the National Parks Conservation Association as the inaugural Civil Rights Era Fellow. My work is Thank you. Our work is incredibly new, so unfortunately, I don't have a presentation for y'all. So I'm going to share a bit about what it is I am doing and what it is I also hope to do as well. My position was created less than a year ago. NPCA, as Ebony mentioned earlier, works in regions, and we have a Southeast regional office, but it is headquartered in Knoxville. And so there was a acknowledgement that to fully fulfill the name Southeast Regional Office, that we needed to do more work in the Deep South. That included Alabama and Mississippi. So my position was created to put someone on the ground in this region to lead that work. My position has 3 to 4 main key parts. The first position or the first part of that position is to help support some of the newer civil rights themed parks in the region. Once these parks are established, it takes a little while for them to get stood up, to receive the funding they need, to receive the program support they need to be fully functioning parks. And these are parks like Medgar and Early Evers, Anniston Freedom Riders, Birmingham Civil Rights, also the Reconstruction Era National Historic Park in Beaufort, South Carolina. So me being on the ground here in Alabama and in the Deep South allows MPCA to have a more on-the-ground presence to support and help stand up these newer parks. The second piece of my position is to help support campaigns for new parks and national heritage areas. The two bigger new park campaigns that I'm help supporting right now would be the Alabama Black Belt National Heritage Area, which I guess has brought you all here today to this panel discussion, but also an effort to establish an Emmett Till National Park in Mississippi. So that is incredibly humbling work to be a part of. Tina mentioned the beginning of this campaign was in 2009. I'm always struck how this campaign has been going on almost half of my life. So it's incredibly humbling to be up here with y'all and to be supporting this campaign. And the third piece of my job is I think where I have concentrated most of my energy so far. And as I mentioned earlier, my work focuses on Alabama and Mississippi. But this is really an effort to lead and support projects that further the ability to tell factual and inclusive stories about civil rights and about social justice history and present in Alabama and Mississippi. And by factual, I mean stories that dig into the full context of our history. I think sometimes when we talk about civil rights history or we see it interpreted, it tends to be a snapshot of a certain period in time or a certain event or certain charismatic leaders. But part of what I'm doing and what my position was created to do was to look at history in its full context, to maybe dig into some of the systemic roots of why certain events happened as well. And the inclusive bit of that factual and inclusive clause is to begin to expand the civil rights story a bit and to look at, with a broader scope, to maybe step outside of the traditional black-white paradigm, race-based paradigm, and to look at other issues maybe pertaining to labor history, looking at issues related to women's liberation, looking at issues related to housing discrimination as well. So just beginning to widen the scope and lens of what civil rights and social justice history is, and to begin to support the ability to tell those stories. And the fourth, which I call the umbrella piece of my job, is just to make sure that the programming that MPCA is doing and the programming that the National Park Service is doing is relevant to community needs and desires. Sometimes, when there's a campaign to establish a national park, the national park piece of that is all that really matters. But really working hard to make sure that we're able to bring again community needs and desires alongside these national park campaigns. For example, in Mississippi, in relation to the Emmett Till National Park, the Sumner, Mississippi community has a strong need for a wellness center. And they have a building, picked out that actually bears Emmett Till's name. So questions that I'm asking myself and that we're working on now is what does it mean to establish a national park in this community when there are very real needs, tangible needs and desires connected in a way to the conditions that created, Emmett Till's lynching? What does it mean for us to establish a park, but not to, work to, meet the community needs and desires? So we're working really hard to help them establish a wellness center there, which we know have job training, would have community space, would have green space alongside the National Park Campaign as well. So that's a little bit about what I am working to do, what I'm hoping to do, and how it relates to the establishment, hopefully, of the Alabama Black Belt National Heritage Area.
Thank you, everyone. And if we could give the entire panel a round of applause again. Awesome. So we have about 35 minutes. I'm going to be stingy and ask a couple of my questions first, and then we'll open it up to the group if you all have questions. I have been informed that for the folks in Zoom world to hear you, you have to come up to the microphone. But I'll let you know when that time has started. But like I said, I just want to ask a couple of questions for the group. Tina, starting with you, working at the University of West Alabama and the important partnership that's come there. I know as we've worked together with MPCA, but can you talk about how higher education institutions play a role in community in that development and things like the Alabama Black Belt National Heritage Area?
There's different ways. If you think about it, it's threefold, and we were all talking about how we evolved. So I started out in the classroom. And so thinking about it from that point of view as a professor who gets interested in the topic, higher education plays a role in getting their students invested in that and actually coming up with like hands-on projects or things like the oral histories that need to be done. Or I still teach in integrated marketing communication. So a lot of times, you know, connecting Philip to maybe a person who needs a film project and getting them out there. So we have those ways that's just very tangible, small ways. But if you think about the other arm that a lot of times universities do, you know, for that research. So research is one way. Two, it's actually the people and the actual, you know, the actual physical efforts that need to be done. And then three, it's looking at it from the point of view with us, we're economic and workforce development. So how is it actually, you know, we're part of the community. In our particular space, one of the things that we were asking was, we were an institution in the Black Belt. And how are we going to have an impact on making positive change for that? And what were things we could do? So while I started in that space, like Joshua was talking about with English and history, what I began to see was that those things are not separate from if a community needs a wellness center, but they might need it in, there's a school space that was very important to that community and it's falling down or it's crumbling, but we need to preserve that story. So why can't we put that wellness center inside that space in which if somebody's coming to use that, and so we begin to connect the dots. So to me, what a university can sometimes bring is they can be that force of connecting the different entities, because we already work with municipal leaders. We already work with individuals in the community. We already work with those things. And so if we can talk about it, and I kind of think with the Alabama River Diversity Network, that's what we do. What we didn't say is we meet once a month as a big group, and we meet by Zoom. But what was amazing is every month, some of us has brought another partner to the table. So, you know, we started out really in the Alabama Black Belt Heritage Area talking about really those historical sites and those cultural sites and how we're connected to it. But now when I look around, we have Philip sitting here with the Conservation Fund. We actually have the Economic Development Partnership of Alabama that comes to every meeting. And it's these people that we really weren't thinking of as partners when we first started. But as we got to talking, we got to seeing how it all works together. And so we have people who are working on water issues alongside of what we're doing, or we're working on broadband. And so Joe will be coming to my campus on November 2nd to hold a meeting about broadband infrastructure in our county and how to get us as part of that. And so that's what I think universities can do, is they can be that connecting factor to help have a space that all the partners can come together. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Tina. Ms. Joe, I have two questions for you. The first one is, in the decades following your father's lynching, has Lowndes County changed for the better in terms of race relations?
Yes, and possibly because the equal justice initiatives.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, possibly because of the equal justice initiatives, Lynching Memorial, and Mr. Stevenson started a project where if you were to honor the people that are listed on the hanging monument, then you could put monuments up for people who don't have them, and you could collect their soil. So the Elmore Bowling Initiative created this coalition, and we had whites and blacks on it working together. And we actually did collect soil for all of the people in Lowndes County who were on that list. And then we put up 2 historic markers, one for a person who was actually lynched on the courthouse ground, and we put up one for 3 people who were lynched because they started a sharecroppers union trying to get better wages. And as a result, we had people coming together, working together. But the other thing that happened in Lowndes County since then, you know, our state has a law that if you remove a Confederate monument that's been there over 25 years or so, you have to pay $25,000. Well, Lowndes County removed its Confederate monument. A young white couple came in and paid the $25,000.
Thank you for that. I'm also curious, Ms. Joe, you mentioned the school that was donated to your foundation. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you all doing?
Thank you so very much. The school was built in 1883 by a former slave. His name was Dr. Mansfield Tyler. One of the things that's very significant about Lowndes County, they have erased all of the history that should have been made known to the public. You don't know anything about the SNCC people coming in when there were no registered voters at all. SNCC came in and registered 4,000 people to vote. And now the county has transitioned from all white in the official capacities to all Blacks, except the judges. So the school was donated to me by Dr. Mansfield Tyler, who also started Selma University. But nobody knows that. Lowndes County did not and still does not want anybody to know the progress that's been made. And so the National Parks Conservation Association is working to change that. In the Lowndes County Interpretive Center, there's nothing in there about SNCC. All the work SNCC came in and did, the people who allowed them to live on the property, like Philip was telling you, none of that is recorded because they don't want the history known. So Dr. Mansfield Tyler built this school in 1883. He donated the property to the Lounsboro Colored Education Association. And that was so surprising for me to just know that a Lounsboro Colored Education Association existed then. So the school has been donated to my foundation. We have received a grant to preserve and restore that school, and we're planning to make it into a museum. The National Park Service has given us a $236,000 grant for the building, but I don't have anything toward the museum. So we still need some money for the museum. So thank you so very much for asking that question. And please Google the Lounsboro School and you'll see a building still standing that was built during the Freedom 1883 when, but it's instead of being with the school, Freedom Bureau School. Right. So it was built prior to the buildings that were built by Sears. It's built prior to the Rosenwald schools. That's the point I'm trying to make. So this building has been standing since 1883.
Thank you for that. Philip and Joshua, I'm asking both of you, but in being familiar with the work of Conservation Fund and obviously MPCA myself, Philip, with Conservation Fund, I think about land. Joshua, the MPCA, obviously I think about national parks, but both of you have found a very special way to prioritize people and community. Can you talk a little bit about how your personal journeys, if you will, oh, I'm sorry about that. How your personal journeys or how your personal work, how you've prioritized the people and the implementation of what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day.
I'll go first. I think for me, it's just an example of the campsites. I don't care, or I shouldn't say I don't care. It doesn't matter who benefits. The community has to be first. The people have to be first. The people who have been protecting this history for years with a shoestring budget and a paintbrush, they have to be first. And so that's the approach. It's my job to find every resource the Conservation Fund has and apply it. and not only apply it, but it has to be for the betterment of the community. So as Joshua was saying, if we're coming in and saying, yes, this historic space is important, but there's no park or green space for the children to play in and for someone to come and enjoy, we have to address that as well. And so my approach is, you know, everybody else get in line behind the families, like the campsite families. Everybody else get in line behind the community in Marion and Whitehall and Selma, in Tuskegee. They have to be put first from now on. There is no other way to do this. It will not work if that is not the case, because the community wouldn't support it, the people wouldn't support it, and we wouldn't learn from it. And so our goal is to make sure that when we go into these communities, I didn't even meet any elected official before I talked to the people on the ground. They let the people on the ground told me who to talk to. And that's what I did. And so that's the approach that we're taking. The people have to come first, the community has to come first, and the stories and the places have to come first. Everybody else falls in line.
Thank you, Philip. Joshua.
Yeah, I think it is incredibly important to lead with community. I'm incredibly just cognizant and aware of, representing a large nonprofit, but also being in the environmental and conservation space that has not always worked that way. That has often operated in a very much of a top-down model, that has pursued its interests above the interests of community. That is often, taken from community to further its interests as well. So I'm first of all cognizant of that in my position, but also just like my personal ethos of just wanting to work in partnership with folks and to wanting to have more of a horizontal relationship rather than a vertical one. I think that frames a lot of my thought and efforts. But especially with this work that is so rooted in community, that is so community oriented, that is derived from community, that implicates community. It is work that would be impossible to do in a just way and an adequate way without, partnering with community in that. And as Philip was saying earlier, I think it's especially important as, working in communities and regions in states that have had so much extracted from them, for us to the best of our ability to, ameliorate some of those harms through our work as well. So it is, the primary operating philosophy, guiding light for the work that I do. And it's encouraging increasingly to see that is true for NPCA as well, and the environmental and conservation space in general.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll say that for folks maybe who didn't know all the organizations, seeing kind of this group of people may have been a bit random. But for all of us, this is very regular in that we work together often. Can you all speak to kind of the benefits that you've seen through the partnerships? We talked about the Alabama River Diversity Network. We've talked about the joint efforts for the National Heritage Area, but what that's looked like and some of the benefits that have come to your organizations because of the partnerships.
I can go.
Yeah.
I'll go first. One, I think it takes time, but I think part of it is just the trust that we have in each other. I've had, Philip, you picked up the phone. I picked up the phone and go, hey, I have a question. How do I do this? Who do I talk to? And so we do see that growing, but I think that's really one of the benefits is that we begin to, we find a solution for this. And so it may open up something a challenge that we need to overcome here, but we always feel like prior to kind of some of this, sometimes we felt alone in our work and we felt siloed in our work. And we no longer, or I don't feel that way. I feel like I've got this group who helps support projects that we need to have done, or I have a sounding board to say, are we going about this the right way? Is there somebody missing from this conversation? Where are the gaps? What do we need to do? And I think for me, that's the beauty of working in this kind of, you said horizontally. Sometimes it's a little slower and sometimes people get frustrated with us because we're taking our time with it. But the other part of it is that, I think really what we're doing, if you think about it horizontally, we're building that foundation So it means it's going to stay for a long time. When you go straight up or you go straight down, you have a tendency to topple over, and we're not going to topple anytime soon.
And I think for me, with the Alabama River Diversity Network, I started joining the calls, and there was a Southern Exposure Program, and I was telling them about the campsite families, and oh, well, we have this film fellowship, and from that grew 54 miles to home from that network. And so those types of relationships and, don't happen by chance, it's intentional. These calls are set up for those types of interface and connections. And so, that's how it all happened for me. And just one thing Tina mentioned, for me and the work that I'm doing, and maybe it's the Marine in me, I was in the Marine Corps, there has to be a sense of urgency, like now, not tomorrow, not 5 years from now, not 2 years from now. There has to be an intentional sense of urgency to protect these spaces today. Today, we are losing them. Those homes have looked like that for years. I am not the first person to see them. I am not. I am not the first person to go and visit Zion. I am not the first person to go and visit Lincoln Normal School. These spaces need our focus, our energy right now. And, so it has to be that sense of urgency. We have to do it right. We just can't go in and say, we have to do it right, but we have to do it now. These spaces deserve that, and the people deserve it. So that I certainly want that to be, this is not, we're going to be talking about this for, no, now is the time to do this work. And so those relationships, Alabama River Diversity Network, all of these conversations, all of us are having it. We're smart enough to figure it out. This is not going to the moon. This is not cancer. This is raising the money to put a hammer to a nail. And we have the ability to do that, and the time to do that is now.
Yeah. If I can build on that, I've heard it often said by a lot of activists that I admire that nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. Collaboration is the key. I felt that acutely moving to Birmingham last year and not knowing a soul. Genuinely, yeah. And so almost being forced into partnership to a degree, but also bringing with me an understanding again that nothing worth doing is worth doing alone. I think with partnership, bringing in the operating question of what don't I know, bringing that into partnership, and then finding folks to collaborate with and connect with that are able to answer those questions. They have different skills, expertise, resources, connections that you might not have by yourself. And it advances the things that you're working on. It can help advance the things that they're working on, and in the end kind of creates a stronger, more wholesome, holistic product in the end. It's, for me, generally, it's the only way to kind of operate.
Thank you. I'll ask one more question, and then other folks have questions. It's been perfect. Are there any projects that you all are working on right now that are developing that you'd like to share with the group that possibly they could get involved in?
I always like to share projects. We just received funding from the USDA to do planning in the city of Marion, Selma, and Whitehall. In Lowndes County, Lowndes County in general, but in Whitehall, where these communities in Marion, I may be wrong, the people that I have talked to have never developed any type of strategic plan around their historical assets. So we're helping them develop that, and I am super, super excited about Marion and Whitehall and these small communities that share this story. They are small, but they are a big part of this story, and they deserve to be heard, and they deserve to be honored. And so we're working in those rural communities to help them with that. And our approach, it is not my vision. Your vision is what drives this. And so we're super excited about the funding, and I am ready tomorrow, but we have to put some things in place first on the ground. But like I said, 2025 is the 60th anniversary of the Selma and Montgomery March. You will see a change by 2025. And it's not me, it's the people. And all they need is the resources. They already want to do it. We're not telling them anything that they don't know. They want to do it. We just have to bring the resources. And so hopefully we can do that moving forward. So I'm super excited about the Black Belt, super excited about the heritage. There's a lot of momentum here, guys. And if you want to be a part of something special and bigger than yours, that's another thing, and I'm going to be quiet. When you're around these people, I'm 6'3". I am small. When you walk in these buildings and you talk to a Miss Bowling, and you talk to a Fred Gray, and you talk to Charles Person, and you talk to these people, and you automatically understand that there is something here that is bigger than you. And it makes all the difference. And you know, for children, I have 2 little ones, trying to teach them humility. It's the perfect educational opportunity. My son is 6. He knows who Dr. King is. So we have to train up the next generation and make sure that these spaces are here for them. They need to be able to visit them. And as their father and as all of us, we can't look at them and say, well, no, it'll be all right. Somebody else will do it. No matter where you are, no matter what you do, if you have nothing to do, visit. That's something. Go to the communities. That's something. If you do that, you're playing a role, a big role. And so we all have to try to find a way to plug into this. It may not be what I'm doing, but do what you can do, and it will make a huge difference.
Thank you. Just quickly.
Just a question.
Yes, ma'am.
As I was saying, I'm Francine Taylor, and I'm the Chair Emeritus with the Black Heritage Council for the state of Alabama. And one of the things, just quick question here, because I know other people out there probably got questions to answer, but would you define or explain or give us example of what you mean by national park sites? Because sometimes we think of a big park area with greenery and stuff. Would you explain? Because sometimes the people in this area need to know what these sites are. What's your definition of them?
I'll let you do the sites. I can do the heritage area. So the heritage area is actually not a place, and we're not, we don't own any land, anything like that. So it is the collection of the story, a significant story of the people that has brought together, and we're telling that particularly culturally, historically significant story. And so that one is not an actual site. It is an umbrella type organization in which we're centering everything around a central story. And for us, it is the importance of this land and the significance of the people and the role they have played to the American story. So if we think about it, and that's why we like to say, looking through the eyes of diversity, looking through diversity. And we also go back, everybody keeps going to, like you went to, why? Telling those deeper stories. So ours is not actual land, that we won't own that land, but sites are a little bit different thing. And heritage areas can help support, many times they will have a national park site under their umbrella. And with sites, they may be limited to the land space in which they are, so they're landlocked. And a heritage area can support them outside of that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We were talking about that earlier today. And it's a question I get all the time. Like some folks living in Birmingham don't know they have a national park site like in the middle of their city. Some folks, when asking about my work, they're like, "Oh, Oak Mountain State Park." Like, do you know it's a different designation. There are now 420 plus national park units. I don't want to say an exact number because I'll be wrong. But some of them are your large national parks like Yellowstone, Yosemite, places like that. And those are like the capital N, capital P, like national parks, large landscapes. Some of the smaller units, like your national monuments, your national historic parks, are also within the National Park Service. They are, managed by the National Park Service. So, as someone who works closely with national parks, I get caught in this trap of like calling everything parks or park units without fully recognizing that not everyone understands what we're talking about. But yeah, the units are just those that are, managed by the National Park Service. Some of them contain green space, some of them do not. So yeah, that's a little bit more of a background on like what the actual units are.
All right, good. This is for Dr. McCall. When we talk about lynching, we show pictures of our ancestors, male and female, hanging from a tree. We show that to young people. You said your father was shot, but it's called lynching. And that took me immediately to Ahmaud Arbery and his murder, which was also called lynching. So would you talk about lynching?
Thank you so very much for that question. That was a term that I did not understand until I did the research. And what I found was that a lynching definition states that 3 or more persons commit a crime and there's no due process. Nothing is done about it. Well, what happened, the mob got wise to that. They did not want it to be recognized as a lynching. So then they started getting 1 person to do it or 2 people to do it. So when that happens, you look for the conspiracy. So if it's planned by more than 1 person, then it becomes a lynching. But it doesn't matter. When we talked about Emmett Till, the young man who was put in the river in Mississippi, that was a lynching. So it doesn't matter how the crime is committed. It's that the number of people, and then there's no due process. Thank you for that question.
Yes, sir.
How you doing? I just want to thank everyone for a wonderful panel. My name is Dr. Cicero Fain. I'm from Marshall University in Huntington West by God, Virginia, where we will claim proudly Carter G. Woodson because he lived his formative experiences there, went to high school there, was the principal there. And I say all this to preface that we're trying to build, I'm leading an effort to build an African-American heritage area throughout Southern West Virginia, which would encompass essentially White Sulphur Springs, where Booker T. Washington and Carter G. Woodson and other Black folks traveled from Virginia into West Virginia. And so I need counsel and guidance. And so I'm pretty much, we've got a team, but I'm certainly the driver. I'm a historian now, shifting over to being what you folks have expertise in. And so at a certain point in time, I just want to hopefully reach out to you and hopefully you can help matriculate me along to getting that eventually done. You do give me a little worried though, Tina, when you say you started in 2009 and you are now acting as if you have it. And I would like very much you give me some insight about, or more conversation about, what does acting actually mean in that definition?
Well, it's not there's the time frame. It doesn't really matter. And so, but when we're talking about acting, is we are doing everything as if we were a national heritage area, but we do not have the designation. So we established a team that works together. So we've gone after, certain funding. We went ahead and did our feasibility study.
Okay.
And then we started attending National Heritage Association meetings and started, learning from other national heritage. We brought in, they actually do something called Heritage Development Institute. So we got grant funding to it was problematic to send folks to their national organization because a lot of times it was just very expensive.
Sure.
So we worked with different organizations like conservation funds and others to help hold a workshop on our own, to help learn about heritage areas and to bring heritage area directors to the Black Belt community.
Okay.
So we had those kind of activities. And then we started thinking and we formed committees and we said, you know, if we were a heritage area, what were some of the things that we would want? So we had an education committee, we had a grants committee, and we started just kind of checking off some of those things.
Okay.
And we just started designing like, you know, this is our mark, this is our brand. How can we help go ahead and start helping those so that when designation came, we had our boundaries, we had those things in place.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by.
If I may ask one follow-up,
Mhm.
where do you house it? You know,
Right.
I mean,
Then that was
the leadership.
that very first thing we did was do a study about where different heritage areas were housed. And that's where we were very lucky. We worked with the Alabama Historical Commission on that, and they had an intern who did a study for us. And one of the ones was that sometimes it was a three-legged stool, and the University of West Alabama came up and said, you know, a university can house it. National Heritage Area, Muscle Shoals is that way. Delta University has Delta National Heritage Area. And it's just that the office is there and they're kind of housed there. Some stand alone as nonprofits.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Wimberly.
To get a national heritage site designation, it has to be done through the Senate nationally.
Yeah.
There was a time when they were doing it. And I happened to be trained at the last one that they did in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And what happens is because our history became so important and we were becoming so important in our movements. Now listen, then they shut it down. No more designations of national heritage sites. That's Louisiana. I got it on my little thing. Now, we've got to change it nationally until they reset the laws. So what you have with the Black Belt, because we are highly populated with Blacks and a lot of what's been happening in civil rights and that is through the Black Belts and other areas, then we might be. But until it is changed in the government, you know, you got to go through the House, then somebody got to go up there and, lobby. And then they listen to you, and then they place you on a bill. And then if the bill goes through the House and then through the Senate, then it becomes a national heritage site. Until that time, we are what?
We're just the Alabama Black Belt Heritage
That's
Area,
it.
not the National Heritage.
There you go. Now, do you get the difference? Okay. Huh? Yeah, well, I know Shelby. I know them all. Thank you. And I'm from, listen, but now let me tell you something. Can I say something? Until you go to the polls, locally, Selma Council, Selma Commission, Alabama, and you get you some representatives to change these laws, and then it works all the way up, it ain't gonna change. That's why they're trying to kill the vote, y'all. So y'all better go vote. I need to see you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I need to see you, Mr. Phillip. It's
Yes, ma'am.
Howard.
Yes, ma'am.
I think I know your folks from Selma.
Oh, my goodness.
Huh?
Wow.
When you moved, they moved to Perry County.
Ma'am.
Marion, you moved to Marion.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So I had heard your name, so I'll give you my card
Oh, yes, ma'am.
and you need to call me.
Yes, ma'am. First thing Monday morning.
And I'm glad to hear you say, now I got somebody who's ready to fight for these sites. I've been on it for years.
Yeah.
Thank God you're here.
Yes, ma'am. And Ebony, I was gonna say, I really want to acknowledge the people who have been fighting for all these years for these rights, because if it were not for them,
Right.
we would have already lost.
I
There-
knew Mr. Hall personally, his daughter in Birmingham and I are schoolmates.
Wow. Yes, ma'am.
And we also know the Hall family and
Yes.
all of the families along the way.
Yes, ma'am.
So call me.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. There,
I have a question. When did they move the southeast region to Nashville now? That office is there now?
It's
Is in Nashville, in Knoxville?
it's always been there.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the
That's for
MPCA
MPCA.
office,
Oh,
not the National Park office is still in
It's in
Atlanta.
Atlanta.
oh,
The
it's
MPCA is
totally, okay.
Knoxville.
Yeah.
I got you. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So we have one more question, but I just want to say as we wrap, there's a call to action, as Tina mentioned earlier. We do have some postcards in the back to write senators to talk about this bill. It's passed on the House side, so what's left is on the Senate side. And we're really advocating for that. Ms. Joe also will have books in the back for sale. If you're interested in buying it, I recommend that you buy it. It's a really good book. And then also we have some material on MPCA. But yes, sir, want to get to your question.
I just want to encourage you to consider an additional site. I had the opportunity to visit Lowndes County in 1966 as a guest of the Lowndes County Christian Movement for Human Rights, which was led by John Hewlett. This is who organized the voter registration. It was the residents of Lowndes who organized it. And for that, tenant farmers and sharecroppers got evicted. And there is a national park along Highway 80 where the tent city that people moved to was.
Right.
But the whole record of their fight becomes very important to get out, whether you agree or disagree with them. And I agreed with them. They said, look what happened to the Freedom Democratic Party. We are not going to join the Alabama Democratic Party. We're going to form our own party. We're going to call it the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. It's not yet a party because we haven't been in an election. And a big fight developed over how they would nominate their candidates. I was fortunate to go back in '66 a second time to attend their nominating convention,
wow.
where they ran for all the county offices and they had multiple candidates for each candidate, and they debated each other and they had a vote and nominated their people to who would be on the ballot for their new party. The federal government tried to stop them from holding this convention. And because the Lowndes County government tried to stop them. The Justice Department had people in Lowndes County. And they said, we cannot protect you. And the leadership led by John Hewlett said, don't worry about that. We got that handled. It was a few weeks before, a black church burnt down shortly before. And they said it was lightning. A week later, lightning hit a white church. And the only thing I know is there no more churches were hit by lightning. These are the caliber of the people that led this movement in Lowndes County. And we got to do something as part of this. This is a very important history. And they raised the idea that we should not be part of the Democratic Party, which I know a lot of people here don't agree with, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah, you're gonna say something? No, I'm glad.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think when we often talk about the Lowndes County Freedom Organization and Party, it's about just the voting rights registration
Mhm.
and not like the decision to create another party because they recognize the establishment didn't represent them. And that's very much one of those, untold, undertold stories here in the Alabama Black Belt that the heritage area, seeks to protect and preserve, interpret as well.
And something we're trying to do right now, so you'll see this rolling out. We're actually creating a kind of a media campaign, but in part of that is we have been doing an inventory for years of the sites that are preserved, that need to be preserved, or that maybe we don't know about. So what we have been doing is we've actually been creating something for each county. Frazine was up here a while ago, and last time when we were in Dallas County for your meetings a couple of weeks ago, Destiny and San were there. They kind of had a preview of the Dallas County one, and it listed some of the sites that we had, but we know that we're missing those. And so we're going to send those out to communities so that they can tell us what's not on the table. What have we left out? What are we overlooking? And what state is it in? So that we'll know kind of where we need to start with preserving those places.
Awesome. Thank you. We're over time, but we will be here. So if you want to follow up with us after.
Well, if you don't mind, I just quickly want to thank the panel first for a wonderful, insightful conversation and the history. I also would like to first let me introduce myself. I'm Dr. Michael Walker Jones. I'm with the Alabama Commission on Higher Ed. And my final question to you is about your partnerships. Because I know we at the commission are oftentimes looking for how can we help to not only in the region, and I know we've been doing a lot of work in the Black Belt with organizations there. And I was just wondering if you could just sort of list a few of the organizations. In particular, are there any professional organizations you're working with, like the Alabama Education Association or the Medical Association, et cetera? But thank you very much. I appreciate your not only your presentations, but your knowledge and your passion about this work.
Thank you. I don't think folks are